for a long time, but I really like the promises of White Peak, so have to keep our fingers on the pulse on that one. The Department of Justice will be scrutinizing the Comcast and NBC merger. Comcast will own 51% and be classified as a provider and distributor of news and media entertainment. Comcast has had issues in the past with their programming in respect to outside channel providers. For example, Comcast had a number of sports packages that they dropped down to being free in order to compete with some outside sports providers that required a subscription. So when you're faced with paying $0 or $10 per month, you go with the free stuff and the other guy loses out. So there's been some trouble there, and the Department of Justice is going to keep an eye out and make sure Comcast plays nice. And speaking of Comcast, that brings us to our discussion of the week, net neutrality. The latest issue is that the White House seems to be backing down from its former pro-net neutrality stance. For those of you who are unfamiliar with net neutrality, what it means is that internet providers cannot intentionally slow down traffic or restrict users or impede certain applications or services. So you might be asking yourself, why should I care about net neutrality? Well, here's why you should care. Let's say there was no net neutrality laws and Comcast was free to do whatever they wanted. You're paying your $50 a month to have your bandwidth, whatever it may be. Your neighbor next door pays $100 a month to have triple the bandwidth of you. Now, you both go to the same website. If there was no net neutrality laws, no legislation, Comcast could restrict or impede your connection to that website in favor of the guy next door who's paying more. With net neutrality laws, Comcast has to be transparent about how they manage their networks, because you do have some throttling on the internet. If there's congestion, there's peak hours, you have to do some adjustment of the bandwidth. That's not the issue. The issue is Comcast going behind your back and restricting your access and reducing your bandwidth just because they're not getting as much money from you. Now, the White House used to be saying, yes, let's go for net neutrality, but now they're backing down, saying, well, there's no real reason. We shouldn't have to worry about this until there's a big situation. Let's not do any pre-legislation. Which, I don't know why you need to wait until there's trouble and people hurt to do anything about it. It's called being proactive and making sure that companies like Comcast that have been known to do some semi-immoral things, make sure they're being held accountable. And right now, the only law from the FCC is that ISPs cannot prevent lawful access to internet content. However, the new proposed measures would be that ISPs can't discriminate against certain websites or services, and ISPs just have to be clear about their network management. This is what you're getting, this is how we're handling your network, so here's all the information and you know what you're paying for, which I don't see any problems with that, really. The main concern that ISPs have is that they're not going to be able to manage their networks appropriately, and that they're not going to be able to offer tiered levels of service, because right now you can buy more bandwidth and you pay more per month for it, but that's not going to be affected by net neutrality. It's all right to buy more bandwidth if that's what you want. Net neutrality is just saying that, okay, you have these tiered levels of services, you just can't push out the littler guy because he's not paying you as much. You still have to give him some level of basic quality access to the internet. And of course, the government is backing off of this now because they're thinking about economic recovery. Who's paying for the infrastructure of our nation? And it's mostly going to be the private companies such as Comcast. They're spending the money to wire out their services. Now, if you restrict them from having tiered levels of services, they're losing some of those higher end dollars that people are willing to pay. You know, someone wants to pay $200 a month for internet, Comcast will gladly take all that money and hopefully use it to build the infrastructure. But like I said before, net neutrality isn't necessarily hindering tiered levels of services. It's just making sure that the littler guy is taken care of and not being squashed out because he doesn't want to pay $200 a month for internet. So I think net neutrality is a good idea. And it's not really going to harm the companies at all. The companies just don't want to be held accountable. They don't want to open the books and say, this is how we're handling our networks. And I don't know why. There's a lot of legislation going on nowadays to limit what companies can do, but the government is buying into companies more than ever. So at this point, if you're buying into a company, you might as well make some rules for them, since you're footing part of the bill. So if you have any thoughts on net neutrality, I'd love to hear them. You may comment below in the podcast notes or send me a message on Twitter. That's all the time we have for this week. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you may do so at PCRTech. And also check out PCRTech.com and the tech blog for your latest Windows tips and tricks. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you may send them to me via Twitter or email me, Troy at PCRTech.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next week.